I do a lot of work with artistic boxes. As you can see, these are some of my artistic boxes. And for source material, I usually go to the Restore and I get kitchen doors. I can get cherry, I can get oak, I can get maples, sometimes other exotic woods. And I break them down and I use them for my boxes. But sometimes I get fooled, and when I bring the doors home, I find that one or two of them have particle board on the inside, and that is not something I can use. So what I do sometimes is I use it to produce art, and I inlay the doors. So this would be a typical door that I would get from the Restore, and this one here is probably ash or maple. Probably ash, more than likely. That's what this one is. And what I would do is I would figure out if I can put a design on here and then do it. So this is really one of the finished ones that I had done. And this is the Geisha girl, and this is the intent for this particular video, is how I produce this particular product. And not only that, I have done other ones in the past, and I think I may even have done some videos on there. So this one would be a parrot that I've done, and no inlays on this one. This one was just etched, and I left it kind of blank. My wife likes it like this. I'm not a particular fan of it, but you know, if somebody likes it, somebody likes it. So that's what this one would be. But you know, usually when I do it for myself, I will inlay it. So this is the same parrot, the same design on a probably another ash board that I inlaid, and I applied a coat of lacquer. Now you can lacquer them, or you can put poly on there, or regular varnish. It's your choice. You don't want too much reflection, but you want some protection. So probably at least a light coat of medium gloss would be fine on this thing. So on this one that we're going to do today, this is oiled, but it's not lacquered or varnished yet. I gotta wait 3 days for this to dry up before I can do it. So the next part of this is how I produce this. I hope you enjoy it. So here we are. We're going to produce the Geisha on a regular kitchen cabinet door. So the first thing I did is I brought up LightBurn, and that's my laser software that I use all the time. And first thing I'm going to do is second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and outline my door frame. So my door is approximately 572.5 millimeters by 270 millimeters. So that gives me my door frame. Now I need the image to put inside of it. So for that, I'm going to go back here, select, and I'm going to do a file, import. And I'm going to import this Kimono 2. I'll bring that in. So now that I have that, push that off to the side, make sure it's selected, and I want to trace it. So I'm going to increase the thing here. I'm going to do Alt-T. Now Alt-T brings up the trace image routine, and I'm going to say OK, because that looks pretty good to me, and that gives me this image. Now for me, I want to do it first as a layer 5, which is a fill layer, and that generates this. So you can see that this is the fill layer, and this will be engraved into the into the cabinet. So I got to get rid of this little thing over here. So I'm going to reselect it, and I'm going to come up here, and I'm going to go ungroup. Now I can select just this one particular piece and delete it. Now I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to select the whole thing again and go group. Okay. So what I want to do is put this into here. So I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees first. And then I'm going to select this because I want to center my image into the middle of my door frame. And I do that by hitting that button. Okay, so I got that done. Now obviously I want to resize it. So I want to make sure that the icon for lock is on because I want it to be proportional. And I want this to be approximately 250. Well, okay, that might work, but let's make it just a tad smaller. I'll go 225. Okay, that's a little bit better. It gives me some margin over here, and I'm happy with that. Okay, next step, I take this red and I want to turn it to black because I don't want to engrave my door. So this gives me my boundaries of what my door is going to be, and this is my image. So I'm going to select everything now, and I'm going to go ahead and go Window Preview, and that is the image that I'm going to put onto the door, and I think that's fine, no problems. So I'm going to go ahead and laser that onto the door. After I laser it on the door, the next thing I got to do is I got to do all the cutouts. So I can't use a fill layer for that, so I'm going to take this whole thing here, do a Control D, which duplicates that image, and I'm going to move the image out of the way to somewhere over here. I am now going to select layer number 2, which for me is the cut layer, the line layer. So when I do anything in this layer here, Window Preview, you'll see that it only does the outlines. So that's going to be what I'm going to cut out to insert into the engraving that I made on the door. Let me shut that down. Now there's a lot of colors that I'm going to use here for the geisha. I'm not going to just simply do all of this on one color. I'm going to do the fans on one color. I'm going to do her dress or kimono on another color. I'm going to do the flowers on another color. So it's not easy just to use it here in one image. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select certain areas that I'm going to cut out first. And it's still grouped, so I'm going to ungroup it. Okay. So again, just select the areas that I really want to work with. I'm going to do a Control D, and I'm going to move this out of the way. So now I got a fan here, but it has all this other garbage that I don't want. So I'm going to select it and delete out objects that I don't need. So I don't want to delete those. We can delete that, delete that, delete that, delete that, and delete that. Okay, now I just got the fan. I'm going to select it all, rotate it just so I can see it over to here. And I am going to cut this so that I get the individual blades out of the fan. I could do that next with any one of these individual pieces, and I do, with the flowers, or her kimono, with the sash. So each one of these will be a separate cut that I'm going to do. So let's just verify that we do have a proper cut. Windows, Preview, and yes, only her fan is going to be cut out. Now for my purposes, I think I'm going to have this as blue, and I'm going to have this as a light blue, and this maybe as a dark blue, just as a contrast. So what I do is I use veneers, and the veneers I use are 0.032 inches thick, which is very, very thin. Sometimes they're a little bit thicker, sometimes they're a little bit thinner. So in order to make sure I have a good cutout, my cut that I do is, and I got a 100-watt laser. So these only work for a 100-watt laser. I run at 60 millimeters per second at 30% power. So that gives me nice clean cuts on almost all of my veneers. Some veneers are a little bit harder to cut, some veneers are easier. So on some veneers I could go up 80 and 90 on my speed. Other veneers I have to reduce the speed. But this is a good compromise and it works on all of my veneers, so there's no reason for me to change that. So with all my veneers cut, the next thing we would do is start assembly. And that will end this particular process, and now we can move over to the assembly stage. All right, let's see what we got here. I've already done a lot of my yellows. I've done my blues, and I'm working on my purples over here. Now, when you etch this board, this door, you got a couple of problems that you have to concern yourself with. One of the things is these lines. They're glue lines. So none of these doors are really a contiguous piece of wood. They're generally 1, 2, 3, maybe even 7 different pieces of wood that are glued together. And when you glue them and laser them, you get these little raised marks. And the problem is you got to get rid of them, because otherwise you're going to get some nice wavy action on your thing. So I use a very small chisel here, and all I do is just real quickly just knock anything out that's on the glue lines. Usually you can feel them, how bad they are. The problems are usually worse if they're really close to the periphery of the cut. So I've already done these, and probably not to my satisfaction, but I've done them, and you can still feel a little icky in there. Then I take a toothbrush and rub that, and that gets rid of all of the garbage that's in there. Alright, so I pre-positioned all of the pieces that I've cut already. I'm not going to do the whole thing yet. I just do a little section at a time. So I'm going to try to do this particular section over here, up to here. And oops, that doesn't look good. Let's just give that a little bit more on the scraping here, just to get that glue line out of there. Don't like glue lines. Okay, so let's start. So the first thing we'll do is we'll put glue just enough to wet everything, and making sure that we got all the boundaries that we're going to do. And this is the big one. So you don't want to over glue here, because if you over glue, believe me, that's worse, because you're going to get, it will start warping the veneer. Okay, so I'm now using a brush, a silicone brush, and moving the glue into every single crevice that I can see. I'm trying not to get too much glue outside of that area. Okay, so yeah, you can see as much of the area as possible. Now this big area I can just swipe in, wiggle around a little bit, work it all the way out, work it here. There we go. Okay, that looks pretty good. I usually go over everything twice because I always miss something. All right, now I got all the pieces I need, and let's start putting them in. So I usually use the slide method, and that means I slide it into place and I wait for it to pop in. I slide it into place, pop it in, slide it in. Okay, now this one might, not sure which direction. Yeah, oh, that didn't go in right. Nope, see that's wrong. So I got a little bit of time to work that one. I thought that one was a little bit off, but I wasn't sure. There we go. That might not be right either, but I'll show you how I'm going to get that one in. All right, and then this little piece over here goes next. And move that in. Now I'm going to go this piece up here. Then I'm going to go this triangle piece. All right, so now I've got most of the pieces in, and I'm going to do this next big piece. So I generally try to work the smaller pieces in first, and then the bigger pieces. All right, so now I got one more big piece to put in. I'll put that in. Make sure that it's in place right. Okay. Now, just make sure that the edges are in and that they're in pretty good. Okay, now I use my purple 3M tape, which is for delicate. Make sure that it overlaps here. I'm going to put that down like that. I'm going to push in here again. Okay. Now, believe it or not, I am going to do this. I just want to make sure everything is seated correctly. I then take my J roller and apply a lot of pressure on it. And I get that in place. Then the next thing I do is add a towel, and then I'll move my weights, and I'll move my weights up to here, and I'll let that sit. Okay, until that dries. And in the interim, I could almost pull off the ones in the back here, but I'm going to let that dry up a little bit more. We're ready for the next stage. Now, we got a problem here I want to talk about before we go on too much farther. And that's the type of glue I use to do this. For the most part, I use Tight Bond #2 Premium. It's a good glue. It works really well. It has a good setup time. I don't have to rush anything. But it's water-based. So what does that mean? On inlays, the bigger the area you've got, oops, let me get this glue in here before I forget. The bigger the area you've got, the more that the veneer will absorb the glue. And what that is as an issue is that it'll start to wrinkle when it's drying up. So it absorbs the moisture from the water-based glue and will wrinkle. So you have to apply pressure on the product, because if you don't, I'm really messing this up, but it'll be okay. If you don't apply pressure, it will curl up and be very wavy when it dries, and it'll dry in a bad state, and you will have one heck of a time either. I got all that in? Yeah. You will have one heck of a time getting it to lay flat and be uniform in color. Some colors like yellow and purple don't seem to have a problem. But with reds, they start turning white when you, or grayish, when you sand too deep, especially if they're wavy. So that's just something to watch out for. And I also put in the bigger pieces last usually, to try to minimize that problem. Okay, so let me be quiet for a second and put in all of these little doodads here. This is starting to look pretty damn good, I gotta say so myself. And yeah, that looks pretty good. Okay, we'll get this piece in here. Okay. Looks good. Now while I'm putting these in, I like to try to figure out what my what my next step will be. There we go. And what colors I'm going to use. Okay. These in there pretty good. And let's get this one. Now I can dwaddle around. Okay, that looks good. That looks good. I'm happy with that. I got to put on the tape real quick here. And will I do my banging? Yes. Okay, I got that in place. Really, the J roller accentuates the pressure. Now I know you may not be able to see it, but there's a depression here on the reds. The purples I don't have too much of a depression, but on the reds I do. And that's caused by the difference in thicknesses between the veneers. So to compensate for that, that is why I use the towel. So I'll put the towel down first, and then when I put the weights on, that depresses the towel into the material and keeps the red flat. When we sand it, we'll sand it all out. And now for my boxes, when I do something like this, instead of using weights, I'll use clamps to tighten it down rather than the weights. The weights only because this is so large of an area, it's the easiest way to go. Now we still got quite a bit to go, and I'm probably not going to show you any more super detail. I'll probably high speed the next one, but all of these little spurts here have to be green. And then I'll make a determination on what to do with the fill-ins yet, so I haven't really made up my mind on that. Like I said, the color wheel says to use yellow, but I am not sure. Okay. So we'll give that a couple hours to dry, and then we'll get back to this. Well, okay, I think in general, I'm not unhappy with it. So I'm going to leave these empty because that basically is her face. This is the hands and that. So there's no sense filling it in. I don't even know what color I would fill that in with because I don't have a light shade of white or dark shade of white, or whatever you want to call it, to fill that in. There's a little mark here. I think that one screwed up a bit. And I noticed there's one little divot in here that I missed, but that's okay. So, okay, I'm done. So the next thing I would do is just make sure that everything is okay, and I'm going to start sanding. So for the sanding portion of it, I'm just going to use, let's see what we got here. Since I've already done a light sanding before on this, I'm just going to use, well, I'm just going to go with 400 and see what happens with that. Usually I would do 220, but I think I'm going to do 400 first and see what happens. If that doesn't work, I'm going to switch over to 220. Okay, so I got most of it sanded down to what I want. So the next thing to do is just clean up the sawdust, and which will reveal what the color is going to be when it's done. And I use mineral spirits for this. So, and that's what it should look like when it's done. Not bad, not bad. Okay, so the next step, since I'm done sanding, is probably just do oil. I use Wacom natural oil, and that takes care of all the finishing. I don't put anything else on it. Don't need to. So this just gets all the dust off. on the sanding. Now there's some icky in here. I'll get that done later. So for now, I think we're pretty close to being done with this project.